Hi, this is Random Excess. I'm here with my partner, Dutch Schultz.
Hello.
We're here with Random Thoughts. So,
Okay.
Random and Dutch sharing random thoughts. It's Saturday night. It's episode 1.6. Last couple of nights, we've been talking about perspective. I think, in fact, really, it's kind of the whole week was driven by perspective. Sunday night's episode last week, we had Vonnie in here, and we're talking about the universe, and she was sharing her perspective on the heart space. And I believe in 1.1 we had Till, and we talked with Till about that. We talked a little bit about the heart space. Um,
Both were very good to have as guests, and their views were definitely eye-opening to me.
yeah, definitely, 100%. And it was a good chance to start talking a little bit about some of my perspective, and you get a sense of, the universe is always talking to us. The universe is never lying to us. I don't always hear the universe. I don't always believe the universe. And those first two statements about the universe, that's that sense that I like to think of as the universe. There's absolute truth out there. There's perfection out there. There is something beyond us that is perfect and absolute and truthful. Okay, yeah, and you can be, if you're religious, you might be able to see something like that. You can be not religious, and you can believe something like that. But then the second two statements of I don't always hear the universe, I don't always believe the universe. That's my perspective. There's lenses on. There's things filtering the direct connection to the universe. For me, it separates me from the universe in some sense. I have to participate in the universe. I am here. The universe affects me. I affect the universe in some small way. But that information, that perfect information, that absolute truth has to be filtered through my perspective. And then that it filters into my mind. I have, people talk about the mind's eye. Well, I have two eyes in my mind. I have the emotional eye, and I have the reasonable eye. It's like the emotional mind and the reasonable mind. This is wise mind theory. So, but first thing it has to do is it has to pass through the eyes to get to the mind. So those are going to be triggering events. Those triggering events are going to be filtered through my perspective. They're going to trigger an emotional response. They're going to trigger a thoughtful response. And the two responses are going to be communicating, much like with my language handshake and the thoughts bouncing back and forth. That happens inside your head too. I mean, this duality is everywhere. This scale of duplication and things like that. There's things that happen out in the universe happening in our heads at the same time. There's this. I wouldn't call it a battle. It's a balance. Sometimes one side wins, sometimes the other side wins. But I want to kind of pass through that. We've talked about that for a couple episodes, and maybe we'll save it again for longer episodes. But the point being that there's this perspective, and that's really the first step. And perspective is so important. Changing your perspective is so important in changing your life. There's two sayings: nothing changes until something changes, or sometimes people say it as, if nothing changes, then nothing changes. Uh, and that thing that really needs to change first, I think, and the one that has the most profound effect is your perspective. Because what changing your perspective allows you to do is not to change anything else about yourself. Your core values can remain constant. The things that you think, the things that drive you, your moral compass can be, at least to your way of thinking, can stay pointed in the same direction. You don't have to worry about that. Now, there's going to be a trickle down effect, and all those things are probably going to change. But it's not like economics, it's not trickle down economics. But there's going to be this trickle down effect that when your perception changes, it's going to inform changes throughout your system. Things are going to happen, but it's that I can only focus. I only have to focus on the perception changing. And that came up with a story today that I saw in the newspaper. NPR ran this little story. There's a little 10-minute, 11-minute radio story about it. It's on the Random Thoughts fan page. And it's the story of Martin, I think it was like Pistorius. He's a South African man from South Africa. It's like the same name as the guy that had no legs that ran the Olympics. I don't know if I didn't actually look to double check if it's the same exact name, but there was that guy Pistorius. What was his name? Rob or?
It's the same name.
It's the exact same name. But this guy's Martin. Martin. In the early '90s, mid '90s, he had something happened to him, and I think it's still open to this day. What happened to him? They don't know what it was. Some illness. They staphylococcal meningitis. Maybe they're thinking. Yeah, but there's doctors were kind of giving up. They don't know. They really don't know what happened. All they know is his whole body shut down. His hands curled up, his toes curled up. he was no longer able to communicate and talk, and it kind of happened over a little bit of time, but he ended up just completely, essentially gone. And at that point, he was completely vegetative, and for the next couple of years, until he was about 16 years old. This happened when he was started happening when he was about 12, I guess, and by 14 he was done. And then by the time he was 16, he was starting to come out of it a little bit. I mean, actually just a little bit. And then over time, between the ages of 16 and 19, he came out of it a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, to where he was kind of pretty fully aware. He talks about um, being fuzzy on Princess Diana dying. At this time, I think he was living in Africa. He might have been living in England at this time. No, that's not true. I think he's in England now, but South Africa, they knew about Princess Diana, I guess. The whole world did. But he was fuzzy on that happening, but he was very, very much aware on Nelson Mandela getting out of prison. So by that, and when you look in the calendars, one happened when he was 16, one happened when he was 19. But by the time he was 19, he was really, really aware, but he still couldn't really move. All he was kind of trapped in his head. And then he tells this story. I linked to the NPR article, but then I also linked to this article in the Daily Mail, which is written by him, and it's a fairly lengthy read. It's an excerpt from a book that he wrote. There we go. You can kind of give away the story right there. He actually gets to the point where he writes a book. And it's just this amazing story. And he talks about in that period from when he was about 16 to 19, when he was first kind of coming out of it, being in a really, really dark place, and dark in that emotional sense. It was a very negative space. And in fact, at one time he remembers his mother taking care of him. And I'll use this as a kind of example. I don't want to give away the whole story, but his mother taking care of him. And she's crying, but she's like trying to bathe him or feed him or whatever, it's kind of things that she would do. But she was really visibly upset. And he said he remembered thinking at that moment very clearly, I wish I could stand up and hug you, Mother, and let you know that everything's going to be okay. And while he's having that thought, while that thought is sort of being completed in his mind, she then says, kind of quietly but loud enough for him to hear, I wish you would die. Why can't you die? And him being crushed because he had just come from this, he and that was just kind of a symptom of the darkness that he was in, and he was in a very, very dark place. But then, ruminating on it, which he had nothing else to do but ruminate, I guess, he was able to realize that from where she was coming from, this was not this was more of a exhaustion. It was like, he understood what his life had become. He understood that his mother was taking care of him, and he understood that this would be a relief for her if only he could die. And that little bit of shift in perspective, a little bit of empathy. A lot of empathy that's what empathy is. It's kind of a shift in perspective. It's seeing something through somebody else's eyes. It's not imagining yourself in their position. It's imagining them in their position. It's really taking on their perspective. And that a little bit of empathy for him started opening the door. And he talks about turning his life around, turning his thoughts around, becoming very positive, becoming, what? I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to learn to communicate. I'm going to, there's a thinking consciousness inside here, and I'm going to figure out a way to, either make the best of the situation. He learned to tell time by shadows on the wall, and he says he can still tell time by just looking in the shadows. So what time it is. It was because he could keep where he was. He couldn't see a clock, but he could tell from what was playing in the background versus where the shadows were. He started making connections and then learned to read the shadows. So he talks about doing stuff like that. So learning, teaching, and then eventually coming out of it. And then he tells a story about how he did kind of come out. A nurse finally recognized that, hey, wait a minute, this is now been going on for a few years. This is not just somebody lying here who he randomly twitches. He wasn't also like frozenly, absolutely frozen, paralyzed. He had body twitches, but they figured those were just random body twitches, and so a lot of them were. But he learned to control them slowly but surely, and he was able to eventually communicate with this nurse in a way that she recognized that, whoa, this guy really knows what's going on. He's not like he's just barely there. He is completely here. And she got him into a program for alternative communication program, so that they work with him with the letter board and see the letters and move your head or twitch your eye. But eventually, and then over time, and now to this day, this was happened. So I gave told you it had to do with Lady Di and Mandela's. That was in the 90s. In the early 2000s, he had a job, he was getting paid, he was in a wheelchair, and to this day, he still can't talk. He uses a computer to talk, like Stephen Hawking. Although he's doing much better than Stephen Hawking. I don't know if you're familiar. Stephen Hawking, his condition has really deteriorated in the last 10 years. Yeah. He's down to he can communicate one word a minute.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's not much. Oh. You know, so the information trickles out of him at this point. But you might see the old videos of him doing it. Now it's like down to subtle eye movements, and they're working with him to try and get the speed up, but his bit rate is down to pretty much stopped. But so this guy, he's in a wheelchair now. He can operate his own wheelchair. He got married. He wrote a book talking about his experiences, and but the point being that it all started with this shift in perspective that moved him from a negative space into a positive space, and that's what I spent a couple days talking about with this, moving from crisis to challenge to opportunity, moving from a negative space into neutral space, and then from neutral space over to this positive space full of optimism and hope. There's possibilities. There's a chance to dream, chance to explore. There's all the things that really get people excited and fired up and motivated are happening over there in the positive space. And he was able to do that. It was interesting that the story was today, and I spent the last couple of days basically talking about this exact thing, and seeing it for myself it makes it really like, wow, maybe I'm not just talking.
It's funny, when I was reading the article, my grandfather actually had something similar. Now, he's had a number of strokes in his past. So when he wasn't really responding, he wasn't quite catatonic, but he wasn't really responding, and he was an elderly man. So we decided that, well, it's getting to be that time as to where, the times that we have with Grandpa is precious. So we moved him into a nursing home, and he started talking about things that was in his past, and some of them were pretty elaborate, but we really couldn't say whether or not that they were completely true, or if it was something that he had read before, or something in that sense. And to make a long story short, he had a staph infection, and which is similar to what Pastorius had. And I remember sitting there, and I looked right into his eyes, and I was his grandson. I was his oldest grandson, and he always knew who I was, and he looked into my eyes, and he was a total blank. And at least I thought he was. But now that I think about it, maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was there. Maybe he was like, I know who you are. Help me out here, But what happened was, months later, after we put him into the nursing home, and when I say months, I'm talking about 8-9 months later, I was in Florida, and I called my mother, and I said, well, how's Grandpa? And she goes, you won't believe this, but we took him bowling the other day. And I'm like, bowling? It's like, the man could hardly move. He could hardly think or talk. And what it was is that they found the right antibiotic. And, so it really worked out, and we were able to get another, I think it was 6 or 8 years, to enjoy with my grandfather. So when I read this article, I could really relate to it a little bit, and I can't even imagine what the man was going through. And I was so impressed with the fact that I know what it's like to have your mind really work against you. As you know, I deal with mental illness. I deal with chronic depression. So I have thoughts in my head that aren't altogether the most pretty things to think about. And the words that he was talking about, that he said that he was thinking about, which was that he was nothing, that he wasn't even worth the time that they're spending, and everything like that. It was just really hitting me, and I couldn't imagine what that would be like to have that happen every single day, and not being able to do something. At least when I had it happening, I had the ability, the physical ability to get up and do something, and whether it be go swing a golf club or, or go bowling and knock the hell out of the pins, whatever the case may be, I had an option to do that. This man didn't have that option. And so it was really impressive that he took it upon himself to learn, and it's really worth a read and to find out about this man, because he took it upon himself to learn how to deal with and to change his perspective about those thoughts, and he challenged them. And it's like I said yesterday in yesterday's episode, that when we're hit with adversity, sometimes it's not the time to lay down. Sometimes it's time to ramp it up. And that's what this man did. And I was very, very impressed, and I respect him a great deal.
Yeah, right. And of course, the lesson here is that these things take time. I mean, he had to take years to change his perspective, and he had nothing else to do but to work on changing his perspective, and it still took a while. A lot of it was influenced by the fact that it was slow at first for him to learn, but changing your perspective to actually shift it to a new position that has a new default position, a new starting position, that is difficult. You're fighting your core beliefs, your upbringing, your family, who you're around when you're younger, spends years informing your perspective, and it's hard for you to move off of that. You can with advanced training, and a lot of times, people go to college, they get advanced degrees, or you go off to trade school, you learn a craft, and doing that, spending years learning something, also changes the way you look at the world. You start looking at the world as a doctor, or as an accountant, or as a mathematician, or whatever. It starts informing your perspective when you've studied something for years, but it takes years to do that. But you can change your perspective. There's things about your perspective that you don't like, and how do you know you don't like them? Well, if you're having negative emotional reactions, negative thought reactions to things that are happening around you, that might be a place where you can look at your perspective. It might be that you're just in a really bad position, and changing your position is what you need to do. But geographical therapy is usually not it's the easiest thing to do, but it doesn't always work. And people you move from one location to another, and if you don't change your perspective, you just end up falling in with the same type of people that you were with before. Without a change of perspective, you make the same kind of friends, you hang out in the same kind of places, you date the same kind of people, you engage in the same behaviors, because nothing really changed. Changing your location isn't really a change. And that's not 100% true. I mean, there can be something to it. Maybe there's a chance to change to get more opportunity, and that can help. But generally speaking, just to move your location is not the end all to be all. It's working on your perspective, which is something that takes years to do.
I can definitely fall into that fact, because I plan on writing a book. As you know. I'm a compulsive gambler. I'm an addict, and one of my thoughts about writing a book is 16 states of addiction, because at some point in time, I moved through 16 states, and my addiction moved with me. And so, I didn't know how to change the perspective. All I knew is that I tried doing replacement therapy. I tried to say, okay, it didn't work out this way, the way I wanted here, so I'm going to move here and I'm going to start over. And that was the intention by all means. But like you say, if you don't change your perspective, if you don't change some things, you're going to fall right into the same pattern. And that's exactly what I did through 16 states. And so I can definitely appreciate that thought.
Yeah, so but well, that was it. When I just want to think about this story now, and just kind of mention some things that I was seeing in it, because I do this little language handshake thing that I've done a couple times. But I kind of think of the thumbs as kind of these are the thinking, these are the minds, these are the centers of thought. This is my consciousness, and this is your consciousness. And then we use language to communicate, and that language has to marry up in the right way with rigid gears. If the intent is to communicate thoughts in a duplicative manner. If I want to duplicate my thought into your head, I want to communicate my thought to you so that you understand what my thought is. That requires this language handshake. And this Martin, in his situation, he was getting all kinds of stimulus, all kinds of triggers. There was things coming in through the language channels. There was stuff coming in. People were talking to him, or things were happening in the room. Things were feeding into the language channels, and that was affecting his thoughts. But there was nothing coming out. It was all one-way communication. It was it was I refer to it as a black hole. He was in a black hole in the sense that the light could come in, but the light couldn't escape. The triggering events, all the triggers, it was passing through a perspective. It was entering the black hole. It was entering into his head, and it just got stuck there. It just stayed there until he worked on an escape route, and he started finding some channels out, and then he had to hope that somebody would pick up on that's what he was doing. They had to move from he's just randomly twitching to, oh, you know what? He's actually sending a message here, and we can verify that we're receiving the message with them, so they can open up a two-way communication. And that thought also made me think, as part of Random Thoughts, connect. There's the story of Johnny Got His Gun, the movie that was made from a book that was written after World War One, about 1917. I think the book was written. It was a World War One book, and then made into a movie in the early 70s, 71, 72, and then it was ultimately made into a Metallica video with a Metallica song, the Metallica song One. If you haven't heard the song or you don't know the song, I would recommend seeing the video. Nobody has time to read a book. Nobody has time to watch a movie. Maybe you got time to watch a video for 5 minutes. I think it's a 7-minute video. Maybe I should have looked it up today. It's kind of a long song, long for pop music. Those, whatever. But it's the story of this guy who was badly mangled in a landmine. And in this story, he is his arms and legs are blown off, and his face is blown up. His ear, he's completely lost all ability to even to receive triggering events. And at the same time, he's not so sure. He's unable to sort of communicate with the outside world. At least as far as he knows, he's unable to communicate. I guess that's one of the stories here. He thinks he's unable to communicate with the outside world. He's not sure because he can't see, or there are no triggering events for him. So his thoughts are like, and he's not sure that there's any way for him to communicate with the outside world. And at one point in time, he decides that and I don't know the full story, but and I don't even know if it's a true story. It's a novel, so I don't think it's a true story. I think but it tells a good story. It tells an interesting story. About the only thing he can do is he can bounce his head up and down on the pillow, and he decides that if I'm alive, I'm having thoughts. It's like Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. So maybe he decided, okay, look, I seem to be thinking, so I must be alive. If I'm alive, I'm not eating. I'm not taking care of myself. So if I'm alive, there's somebody doing that. There's somebody taking care of me. That's the only explanation for me being alive this long. Otherwise, I would have died of starvation, thirst, infection. Something would have killed me. But if I'm still alive, there must be somebody taking care of me. If that person's taking care of me, maybe I can communicate with them. And he was able to convince himself that he was moving his head. He wasn't sure that he could move his arms because he didn't have any sense that his arms or legs or anything like that were moving. And he certainly wasn't receiving any other stimulus coming in. No light, he couldn't hear any sounds. He didn't feel anything. So he was able to bob his head, and he started bobbing his head in SOS messages. SOS, SOS, kill me, because that's all he wanted to do was die. But so in the movie, there was this again, sort of one-way communication, but there was no way for him to confirm or them to confirm that they were receiving the message. So he's sending messages, and he's not sure that there was even anybody out there to receive them. It was a little bit different in this story with Martin, which is a true story. He's sending messages out, and he's hoping that they're going to catch on to the fact that he's sending messages. But he's in full awareness at this point they're right there. All they have to do is look. Look, I'm sending this message. I know, and then they were able to verify eventually that they were receiving the message. They were like, "Oh, we can hear you because you're," and he's like, "Yeah, yeah, okay." And then they started the whole two-way communication, and it's over time. Like I said, he's gotten better. He talks with the computer now, and he's mobile in his wheelchair, and he's married and writing a book, and he got a degree in computer science and moved on. But in this book, other book story, it was even a much more locked-in case. So these locked-in stories are, I find them interesting. And I would just tell one other locked-in story just to maybe encourage you to look into these locked-in stories. And the importance of these stories are to give you an opportunity to think about what what does perception mean to you? What does communication mean to you? How do thoughts in my head become thoughts in somebody else's head? It is that important to me, and I think these locked-in stories remind us that it is important to get thoughts out of our head and into somebody else's head, and to get thoughts from other people's heads into our heads, and to do that via communication. So I think these stories remind us the importance of communication and the importance of sharing thoughts. And so the last locked-in story I want to mention is this one. It was a story in France. It was a French journalist. And again, you can look this up because I'm going to give you the name of the book, but I don't remember the guy's name. And I don't want to butcher it. Being a French name, you don't want to butcher a French word or a French name because then the French come after you. And the last thing I need is angry French emails.
Yeah, well, coming from my grandfather being Gerard, yeah, I don't do that. 100% French.
Okay, so the book is it's called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, and the guy was a reporter, and about '95, about the same time Pistorius was went into his locked-in state. This reporter something happened to him. I don't know what it was exactly. We'll call it a stroke. He had a stroke and then had a car accident. It turned into an infection. Whatever it was, he was out, and then for 20 days he was out. And after 20 days, he started coming out of it, just mere 20 days. And he realized that the only thing he could do was to move his left eye. I think it was his left eye. It was the only thing he could do. He couldn't move his right eye because it had been sewn shut to prevent a spread of an infection. So he was down to just one eye. And he was able to get the attention of a nurse or somebody relatively quickly because I guess he had pretty good control over the eye, and they were able to realize, oh, he is actually blinking a message here. And then he was able to use that to actually write a book. Now he wrote a book about his memoirs. So this is a book that it seems to be about his time before the accident, not his time while he's locked in, because he was locked in. He was out for 20 days, and then almost right away started writing this book, and that was in 2000. That was in '95, and then by '97 he had written the book. So he took 2 years to write a book. So those of you who are out there trying to write a book, he wrote a book in 2 years, and he wrote it one letter at a time by blinking his eye, and somebody writing the letters down. So when you say you don't have time to write a book, or it's taking a long time to write a book, I'm going to ask you what you're. Then again, he had nothing else to do but blink his eyes. So, so if you take all your time and blink your eyes, maybe you can write a book too. But he got the book written. It took him a couple of years, and in '97 the book was published. He got his book out, and then I don't know, Cruel Twist of Fate. 2 weeks after the book was published, he passed away. So, he had a book in him, and he got the book out. And, his time was up. And I don't think, I call it a cruel twist of fate. Of course, I don't believe the universe was being cruel. I think the universe is just doing what the universe was doing. But what this guy did is he took advantage of an opportunity when he had it. Instead of cowering at the crisis, pounding at his door, he recognized, hey, opportunity is knocking. Let me go ahead and answer this door, and let me blink this book out. Let me write this blinking book. So yeah. So he did it, and he wrote the book, and the book was made into a movie a few years later. You can look it up, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. And that's another story of Locked In, but it's a story about communication. It's a story about thoughts, the importance of getting thoughts out, the importance of shifting perspective, the importance of facing crisis. But we don't have to face it as a crisis. We can face it as a challenge, and we can face it as an opportunity. But we do have to face it, but it's a lot better when we face things willingly, not just willingly, but joyfully and purposefully, and really trying to do something positive with our lives. That's the way to face things. So I want to go ahead and end it there. It's been a great week. We had a lot of fun. I think made a lot of progress with the show. made a lot of progress with the kind of things I want to talk about, and going to try and ramp it up, talk a little bit more about some other stories. Yesterday we didn't really talk about any stories. Today I tried to bring in a little bit of topic of locked-in syndrome, and then use that as an example, as a starting place to talk about some of these other ideas. And that's what I want to do. I don't want to focus on just rehashing the day's news. I want to talk about sort of what I see in the day's news that relates to the way I think about things. And so hopefully when you look at the news, and especially when you have a reaction to it, an emotional reaction, or it triggers some thoughts in your head, that maybe you take that time to ask, what's going on in my head? Why am I thinking that? And then sharing that with other people. That's the important part. That's another part of this. It's not just keep the thoughts in your head. These locked-in stories tell us the importance of sharing. So it's learn, improve, share. Make sure you're engaging in the sharing part. Change your perspective. Interrogate your perspective at least, and work on changing your perspective if you like. If you're not happy with the way you think about things, change your perspective. Seems to be cheaper than moving. I think I want to go ahead and wrap it up there. Shane, do you have any closing thoughts?
Well, I think when we were talking about changing perspective, and I know that we've talked about some miraculous instances with the stories today and over the week. But I want everybody to know it doesn't have to be a miraculous situation at all. I mean, it can be, the way that you look at your job. It can be the way that when I was younger, I used to look at chores in a totally different way than I would look at them now. Because, and in essence, I actually tortured myself when I was younger because of it. Because it took all day in order to be able to get them because I had the wrong perspective while doing them. So, it doesn't have to be something miraculous, but it can be definitely beneficial for you. So, I have really enjoyed this week. I really think that we've made some progress. I think that the enhancements that we've done in regards to our interaction with our followers on Twitter, on Facebook, and the feedback number, I think that we really got something here, and we're hitting the ground running now.
Yeah, the revisions to our performance have definitely been in part fed by the feedback. So it's performance feedback revision, and you could share your feedback with us by contacting us on our Random Thoughts feedback line. It's 15189-666-175. That's 15189-666-175. Phone lines are open from 3 to 4 p.m. during the week, 3 to 5 p.m. on the weekends, and then 11 to midnight after every night's show for live show feedback. Give us a call. If you call outside when the phone lines are closed, your message will be taken and forwarded along to us. Courage, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Have a good weekend.